Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 120. And this episode, Matt and I wanted to talk a little bit about exclusivity in releases, whether that's between consoles, companies, or even entire platforms. It's not a new thing, but it's taken a lot of forms, and it shows no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, I thought in like the 2000s, the weirdest that would ever get is when Sega went under as a console producer and then became a software developer. And whatever the first Sonic game I played on a Nintendo console was, I think it was Sonic Adventure DX on the GameCube.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is weird. This shouldn't be that weird, but it's weird based on how I grew up. You know, we've talked previous episodes about mascot exclusives and how, like, you know, the mascot wars of like the Sonics versus the Crashes versus the Marios. But this goes beyond that. I mean, modern studios have always had exclusives as well. And like, it's always interesting to see which ones don't say exclusive. For example, a modern one like Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royale are exclusive to the PS4/PS5. However, Strikers is on multiple platforms, and it's on PC, it's on Switch, I believe, and like
Strikers is
Strikers, and that's very interesting to me because those are two games in the same narrative. It's technically a sequel, but you can't play the original anywhere but one place, but you can play the sequel-ish game on multiple platforms. Like, that's such an odd choice. But yet that kind of thing has become common. Like Persona 4 Golden is on Steam now, but none of the other Persona games are, not even Persona 5, which is the newest one. Why? You know, what's more interesting about this conversation is less what the exclusives are, but why some of these decisions about exclusives are made and how those decisions are made, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in a more historical sense, and kind of piggybacking off of our previous episode, the reason why there's two completely different Castlevanias on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were because of Nintendo's exclusivity contracts with companies. There's so many resources out there if you want to learn about Nintendo's very draconian practices of business and exclusivity and limits of releases, which had some founding and had some logic and reason to them, definitely. But also people bristled under them, and there was a lot of workarounds that were made. And so Konami could not release Super Castlevania 4 for anything but the Super NES. But they could release Castlevania games for other systems, and so they developed in parallel a completely different Castlevania game that came out pretty much around the same time. This is also why there's a bunch of there's plenty of Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis simultaneous releases where same team, they just made it work because different hardware. But other ones where it's a lot of the Capcom Disney games where the SNES and the Sega Genesis releases were very different because, well, you can't release this one here, so we have to make that happen. And that's just a matter of exclusivity, of legality. You also run into a lot of exclusivity of the hardware, which is something that leaves me very curious about things like Persona, where Persona 4 Golden, yeah, it's the best version of Persona 4, but for the longest time, it was only on the PlayStation Vita. Because Persona 4 was originally a PlayStation 2 game, and Golden was the re-release that they put out on the Vita. I don't think they did a version of it on the PS2, or if they did, it was not released in America. It was like, when I think of the conversation, it is always Persona 4 Golden, PlayStation Vita. It's why I got a PlayStation TV all those years ago and got me back into PlayStation stuff. So maybe because of already that porting effort, it's easy enough to move that along, because there's also the difficulties of porting from one platform, environment, engine to another, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like, I mean, between Xbox and PC, it's becoming more and more seamless where these Steam releases or these PC releases will just end up on Game Pass because they're so close to each other. Because often, especially the current gen of Xbox, is essentially a small computer. And the PS5 is pretty much there as well. But like, what's also interesting is you mentioned exclusivity of consoles even within the same family. That makes me think of always the DS or Game Boy Advance versions of games that are on, you know, home consoles, and how those were literally just the limitations of the platform. How, you know, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric and whatever there was a second one. Both of them had their console versions which got panned, and then they had 3DS versions, I believe, that were actually sort of okay because they had to do a side-scrolling Sonic game because they couldn't do the open world games as easily. And that kind of stuff always fascinates me as well. Like, there are two very different versions of Sonic Colors, which just got a re-release. And I believe it was a 3DS game, like, is a kind of just a regular side-scrolling Sonic game. It's in the Sonic Advanced or Sonic Rush family. Like, it feels like those kinds of very fast-paced Sonic games, but it also happens to have the special abilities that are throughout Sonic Colors. And I think that kind of exclusivity is also really interesting because it's just the limitations of the hardware. And that's not always what drives it, but it sometimes is.
Right. And that may be why the Switch gets certain releases from something and not something else.
Right.
The limitations of the Nintendo Switch are fairly well known, and certainly in terms of storage space on the carts, the amount of times you buy a game or a retro collection and only half of it is on the cart and the rest of it is a download code, much to my eternal frustration.
Yeah.
Something like Persona 5 Strikers is probably far more easily put in the Switch environment onto a Switch cart than something like Persona 5 Royal, which is hundreds of hours of voice lines, of scenarios, of gameplay, of all of these things. Like, you can get hundreds of hours of gameplay out of a small thing. That's fine. But certainly Persona 5 Royal, they voiced so many additional scenes. Yeah. And that level of space being taken up and additional everything else is important or is crucial to the package that you're selling. And that sort of leads into a thing that I've been running into in just my own research for funsies. I mean, the fact that, yeah, like the Xbox these days is essentially just a tiny PC or a very specialized PC. And you also look at a lot of games these days. Something that's wonderful about the game development scene of today is the ready availability of engines.
Yeah.
The amount of games that are developed in Unreal Engine, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, Unreal Engine that's wonderful. The amount of Game Maker Studio games, the amount of Unity games, it's incredible. It's wonderful. And it puts that out there. And it probably, I'm not going to assume, because I've never developed a game in any of these environments, I'm going to assume that it makes the porting process a little bit easier or a little bit more painless. Whereas look up interviews about porting Uncharted to PS4 and the fact that they basically had to rewrite all of the code. Yeah. Because a lot of the cell processor workings of the PS3 are so idiosyncratic. They could be extremely powerful and very cool, but doesn't play nice outside of its own architecture. And this is why we also run into, why do we get this game and not that? You got to look under the hood.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is like that kind of exclusivity based on power is why we're seeing some games come to Switch later, some games coming to Switch as cloud versions. And like some of them make sense. Like Control is a gorgeous game that I played for the first time on my PS4 and it could barely handle it. Like it was chugging. It was still a great experience and I still love the game, but it is a gorgeous game. The version, there is a Switch version. It's cloud-based, which like if that's your only way to play the game, I think it's still worth playing, though I've not played any of the cloud-based games, but like Guardians of the Galaxy is the same way. They just announced that Dying Light 2 is going to get a cloud version on Switch, and it's, as of when we're recording, has recently been delayed. But then there are games like the final mixes of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, which are PS2 games that are getting cloud ports on the Switch. And like, I get the third game being a cloud port because it was a gorgeous, gigantic game on the PS4, but like, the first two games are PS2 games. Those can for sure run on Switch. And so like those kinds of decisions also don't make a ton of sense to me. But then again, talking about exclusivity in Square Enix, like the Pixel remasters are currently exclusive to mobile and PC. We know it's not going to last. We know they're biding their time till the sixth one is done. And then they're all coming a console in a package. But that said, when they made that announcement at that Square Enix showcase, like the room lost their minds because it just seems like such an odd choice to debut on PC games that are famously known for being on consoles. It just seems like such a bizarre choice, but I'm sure the PC market is the PC market is much bigger for Square Enix than it ever was between Final Fantasy XIV, how a lot of their more recent games have gotten PC releases, 13 and 15. So like it makes sense on a level, but it just does seem strange that the Nintendo games are not debuting on a Nintendo platform.
Right. Well, Square Enix hasn't been an exclusively Nintendo company in many, many years, decades even. And the fact that certainly I found it very interesting that not long before the Pixel remasters were announced, I was looking up how much of the Final Fantasy series can I play on the PC right now? And they didn't have 1 and 2. Yeah. The only ways to do that were on console. So it's an interesting way of... I'm endlessly fascinated by the corners of certainly the Final Fantasy series of how can you play as much of the series as you can on as few platforms as possible. It's always been a little esoteric or a little odd or required some importing or something like that. So I certainly appreciate that. I appreciate that given PC gaming's very digital first distribution makes it a little easier to put these things out. I mean, the original Final Fantasy series, one of the platforms where you could play a lot of the sequential games was on mobile. I remember like playing Final Fantasy 1 on my iPod Touch, years and years ago. Do they still make iPod Touches? I think they do.
Maybe.
Technically, probably still. And so you're right. It feels weird.
It feels specifically weird also because like all of the exclusives, because Final Fantasy has been more exclusive to Sony, and Square Enix in general has been more exclusive to Sony for a longer period of time now.
Oh, yeah.
And like, last year at some point, or maybe 2 years ago, I can't even remember when, they announced that 7 through 12, excluding 11, of course, because it's an online game and that's complicated, were all coming to Switch. All of them. And so like I have 7 and 9. I didn't rebuy 8 yet, but I'm thinking about buying 8, 10, and 12 just to have them all in one place. But then I realized, but even if I do that, I can't play the first 6 games. Like if the Pixel remasters come out, more specifically when the Pixel remasters come out on Switch, I might be inclined to just drop, $100 to $200 to get imagine having every game up to every game except all of the iterations of 13 on one console, because there is the pocket version of 15 is also on Switch, and which was the mobile version. So like you could have every Final Fantasy game on one singular portable console, which has never happened before. And so that's what's really most interesting to me. And like, I wonder if we're going to get ports of 13, 13.2 and Lightning Returns, because they're 360 games and the Switch can handle playing 360 games. There are games of that level. Like they just announced the Ezio collection is coming to Switch, and it's not a cloud version. It's a port, but it's all of those games, which were all Xbox 360 generation games. So like, I'm curious with that port and that exclusivity specifically, how that's going to go, because we've seen Square Enix's Sony exclusivity bend more recently with the PC Windows version of 15 and like Kingdom Hearts coming to the Epic Game Store first, which was surprising. All of those things are what is most interesting to me about these conversations, because some of the choices just seem so strange. Like think about Deathloop, right? Bethesda got bought by Microsoft. We'd known that was coming for a while, and it finally went through last year. But right as that's getting confirmed, Sony also confirms that Deathloop has like a whatever it is, 6 month or 3 month. I think it's 6 month exclusivity, 6 month to a year exclusivity on just PlayStation and PC. I think it was also on PC, but it's not coming to other consoles until after that. But now every Bethesda game could just be exclusive to Xbox, maybe, if they decide to flex that muscle, because they own that studio now, which Bethesda was notoriously very console agnostic. There was even the mobile Elder Scrolls game is on Switch, Elder Scrolls Blades. So like, that's also, when that kind of thing comes into play, that's also really interesting with exclusivity, because it goes beyond just, this is our company that we own.
Yeah, and as mentioned, where the environment in which these games are developed is a much more system agnostic these days than it used to be, you do run into timed exclusivity windows where it becomes don't miss the game. It definitely plays into FOMO. It plays into those ideas of, we're talking about the pixel remasters. And if you don't want to be overspending and double dipping on getting the pixel remasters on PC only to get the mostly inevitable physical collection or digital collection on your Switch, then you have to sit and wait while the conversation is going on, while videos are being made about it, while tweets, while posts, while everything is happening. And you need to hold that line. And I'm very used to waiting for games, but I still feel that pull. I still feel that temptation of, but I need to know now. By the time I get it, no one's going to care. And it's powerful. It's potent. And it is, I'm sure, profitable.
Right. I think that's a big part of it as well. And but even in the other direction, like I was talking about before we started recording earlier today, I saw a tweet from the PlayStation Twitter account about go get God of War, the newest one, on PC, on Steam, and the Epic Game Store. This is a tweet I never thought I'd see. Sony promoting PC purchases, but Sony putting their games on PC is fairly new. God of War, Horizon, I believe Last of Us is coming. And these are all made by studios that are pretty much owned by Sony. Santa Monica Studios, of course, outright being owned by Sony. I don't know about Naughty Dog, but Insomniac also owned by Sony. We could get a PC release of Spider-Man. It was believed to be impossible, but now, because Sony is starting to put their games on PC, and it seems like an obvious choice, right? Sony has kind of dragged their feet more than other consoles in playing nice with other platforms, like even Xbox and Nintendo doing partnerships over Minecraft and making it cross-platform and stuff. Sony's always dragged their feet on that.
Right.
It took them forever to make their version of Fortnite cross-platform with everything else. I just think it's interesting now that they are starting to play ball with PC, but it's because they know they'll make money. They know that if someone had a PS4 and an old PS4 and tried to play God of War, it probably didn't run great, like my experience with Control. But now that they're releasing it on PC, a lot of folks have higher end PCs more easily now because they are more accessible to get. So they might rebuy it. I won't, because I own that game through PS Plus, and there was a PS5 upgrade. So I know it's going to look as good on my PS5 as it would on my PC. But for other people who maybe don't have a PlayStation, or just it was easier for them to get a PC, they can now have this game that they thought otherwise was completely inaccessible.
Well, one of the things that is just now occurring to me is a lot of the power of an exclusive game, exclusive franchise, studio, whatever, is it doesn't drive sales of the game. It does. But what it does is it drives sales of the console. Yeah. How many people bought a PS1 for the express purpose of playing Final Fantasy VII?
I know I did.
Yeah. So I can name at least 2, maybe 3 people off the top of my head who have done that. And most people who had a PlayStation got Final Fantasy VII. This is just whether if it wasn't Final Fantasy VII, it was Gran Turismo, it was Metal Gear Solid, it was whatever. But those exclusives sell the console. They get you in the door like that. And very historically, many console makers sell at a loss on those things. So you want to get those things kind of rolling, going, and to generate the profit on that and get people into your environment. But try to buy a PS5 right now. Try to buy an Xbox Series X right now. We have them. They're out there, but they're much more difficult to get a hold of due to the pandemic, due to chip shortages, due to so many other mitigating factors. And so rather than move consoles, you are getting your secondary income, your whatever extra money as your revenue stream as a game company by getting to hoard something for just long enough to get people to either associate it with you or bring it into your environment or to develop enough fervor and want for it. So even if people aren't necessarily, if I'm not buying an Xbox Series X, which I'm not planning on doing, if I'm not buying an Xbox Series X to play whatever exclusive game in 6 months or so, like I've wanted to play this game so much, it can magnanimously be on PC now or on PS5 or something like that. They get the licensing money and we all get our games.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it's funny, like I bought my PS, like this is unprecedented. There's never been a console cycle like this where the brand new console was this hard to find. Even the OLED Switches, which I think are easier to find than the other two, are hard to find because of the chip shortage. Usually that kind of difficulty lasts about 6 months. I remember, getting my first Nintendo Switch like 3 or 4 months after it came out, and it was still kind of hard to find. But like being over a year into the life cycle of a console and still not being able to just go to a store and buy it is absolutely unprecedented for the industry. And so I'm sure that pushing God of War to PC is, well, I don't know if that was the only reason why, definitely probably sped up that timeline, made them want to do it sooner because they want people to play their games. And right now they can't. I mean, for me, I bought a PS5 because I'm a lunatic and wanted a PS5. But like the first PS5 specific game I got besides Sackboy and Miles Morales, which came with it, was almost a year later when I bought Guardians of the Galaxy. Now I have a bunch of PS5 games. I'm playing Tales of Arise right now, and I bought Yakuza Like a Dragon. But like when that system launched, there was no reason to buy it because Miles Morales and Sackboy's Adventure were both on PS4 as well. Like Tales of Arise is the first, I believe, PS5 exclusive I bought. I don't believe there's a PS4 version of Tales of Arise. I don't remember. I know there is a PC version, but I'm not 100% on that. But like even still, I feel like there aren't that many games that are only coming to PS5 until around right now. Like I believe Horizon Forbidden West is PS5 only.
It does look like Tales of Arise was on PS4 as well. You get that for quite a while of the, there's Persona 5 Royal is PS4 exclusive, but Persona 5 was also on PS3. You get that for a little while.
Yeah. And so like, I feel like what's interesting about console exclusivity now in a time when we can't get those consoles is really interesting. But also Microsoft is an interesting thing that you bring up because like for me, the only games that got me to buy an Xbox were at the beginning at 360 was Mass Effect, which is now multi-platform. Then it was Halo and Gears of War, which are also now both multi-platform. They're available on PC, especially the newest Halo is flat out on Steam. And I believe the Master Chief Collection might be as well.
I think so.
And so like, that's really interesting to me. Like I was going to buy an Xbox for the new Horizon game, Forza. I'm glad I didn't because I ended up bouncing off it pretty hard. But like, I struggle to think of Xbox only games, but with the acquisition of Bethesda and the recent, as of when we're recording, acquisition of Blizzard Activision with all the complication that comes with that we're not really going to touch on in this episode, at least. There's a world where Overwatch or Diablo or not necessarily World of Warcraft, but like a future Warcraft single player game maybe could be timed exclusives on Xbox because they own that studio. I don't know if they're going to do that, but they could. Like I believe Starfield supposedly is coming out on November 11th of this year, but it's a Bethesda game and it's the same studio that worked on like Oblivion and Fallout. So like, it's anybody's guess if it'll come out on time and it'll work when it comes out. But there could be a world where this summer Xbox goes and it's going to be a timed exclusive on PC and Xbox for this amount of time. And then the other platforms will get it. I don't know that they'll do it, but they could. And that's interesting to me too, because goes back to your business conversation of like, all of this is to get people to buy. Double dipping on platforms is so common now.
Yeah.
In a way that it wasn't before. Like I've done it a ton of times. I'm trying to think of how many copies of Chrono Trigger I own. I own a lot of copies of Chrono Trigger. But like I've felt less bad about doing that, especially when one's a portable platform. Like I own Fuser on PC and Switch. I believe I own Shovel Knight on PC and Switch. Like I'm less hesitant to do that, especially for indie games, Boyfriend Dungeon I have on PC and Switch. Like I think that's becoming more common also, and studios and publishers are getting wise to that and leaning into it more.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Sometimes it's easier to forget that you already have a game if you can't see a box for it.
Right.
That's certainly one of my reasons for hewing so close to buying physical games, because I am a scatterbrained mess and I've rebought physical games that I had and had listed, and this just happens to me sometimes. So I can only imagine the amount of times it happens to so many people, to a wide swath of the gamer population. But yeah, I can imagine building these revenue streams, as much as I loathe that term, that idea of, well, how are we going to make our money on these games? Well, they're licensing it out to other studios so they can sell it. They get their cut, but we're getting a cut of that and everything else. Because also, one of the other benefits, as it were, of a studio, a game being exclusive is the financial support.
Right.
Game development budgets are all over the place. And for AAA titles, for tentpole franchises and releases, they're only getting higher because of expectations, because of team size, because of marketing budgets, because of everything else. And not every game has their development budget publicly listed.
Right.
I've been trying to find it for a bunch of different games, and there's estimations on things or certain acquisition deals, but not necessarily the development budget. The development cost of Cyberpunk 2077, according to Wikipedia, the total cost of it, including development and marketing, was $316 million. And $174 million was just the development.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine the number of studios that have that kind of capital to themselves that they can work on that and build that and do that, as opposed to studios like Kitfox or Supergiant or Yacht Club of ones that we speak of often. And so it's the same idea as, why do you go with a publisher? Because they can protect you like that. And now it's reaching a late stage capitalism point of how can they afford to keep making the big games that everyone expects them, as it were, to make, even if a lot of us are vocal about the fact of we would rather the games take longer, be shorter, could you please? But that is one of the voices. However loud or soft it is, we feel like we're loud enough about it, but that's just everywhere. And so in order to make that happen, those have to be covered and those have to be taken and these things have to happen. And our perceptions will shift, or the lines will shift, but our perception won't. Because, we mentioned earlier, Microsoft very recently, as of this recording, going forth with their deal of acquiring Activision Blizzard. Now, I still think of Blizzard as Blizzard.
Right. The PC game studio, right?
Yeah. And they haven't been that in a long time. And we've talked about that on this show, that they haven't been that in a very long time. And you have to look at them as they are. And you consider that acquiring Activision Blizzard, that's getting Diablo. That's getting Overwatch. That's also getting Call of Duty. That's also getting the whole rap sheet of what has been acquired. And so on the one hand, that allows for the risk being taken on or the support happening or the umbrella being put up. But it also makes for monopolies. Yep. And that is something I am very worried about in terms of game development.
Well, especially with Xbox, who's already part of a big company, Microsoft. And if there was a alarm bell for the government to step in on a monopoly ruling in the gaming space, it would be this acquisition, because we know about the difficulties with Activision Blizzard. We know how the mistreatment of their employees, and that is not what this episode is about, though I do think it's worth mentioning. But Activision is one of the biggest game studios still running, and then acquired one of the biggest PC developers running. And between Call of Duty and a bunch of other franchises that are yearly that they've put out, all of that stuff. I mean, also think about the Crash Bandicoot Vicarious Visions, but who did the remake of the Crash Bandicoot games. They own that now also. Smaller studios run it, and King, who makes Candy Crush and a few other games, also part of that acquisition. And I like Phil Spencer well enough as a person, the head of Xbox, but I think that it's a little concerning that also right after the Bobby Kotick stuff came out, he said, we're going to reevaluate our relationship with them because, this isn't okay. And then they bought them.
Yeah. Is he going to individually talk to every employee of Activision Blizzard? I highly doubt it.
Yeah. And so moving that aside, it does make the future of exclusivity seem weird. And also something I want to bring up is we said Sony and Nintendo will never share their exclusives with other markets ever. But now God of War is on Steam and Epic.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a huge jump for God of War to end up on Xbox. It really doesn't at this point. It still seems unlikely now, but it doesn't seem impossible in the way it used to. And so, like, while I still really don't think Nintendo will ever share its exclusives that are in-house published, like their Kirby's, their Mario's, their Metroids, because of this Sony thing with PC, it doesn't seem impossible that Nintendo may someday put their games on PC, right? PC seems to be the independent platform. It is unlikely we will, in our lifetime, but who knows, see God of War on Xbox because those are console competitors. But like, also that line gets blurry. Think about Octopath Traveler, how after it was such a huge success on Switch, it then came to Xbox, it came to PC. You know, Triangle Strategy, I think is aiming for like a simultaneous release. I think it's PC and Switch.
Oh, wow.
I think I have to double check that. I could be wrong on that, but even still, I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to come to PC because Octopath Traveler did as well. Again, that's Square Enix, and they're not exclusively a Nintendo publisher, but they are exclusively publishing games on Nintendo that then a year or two later are coming to PC and even Xbox. So it's interesting to me how the franchise exclusives don't seem as important as they will. I mean, you mentioned Uncharted earlier.
Yeah.
The Uncharted, I believe both Uncharted re-releases are eventually coming to PC. They did a collection of the first three games. They're now doing a collection of the fourth game and Lost Legacies for PS5, which annoys me because I just bought Lost Legacies and beat it like 6 months ago. It's fine.
This is what happens.
But like, those are going to go to PC. Uncharted, again, Naughty Dog, one of Sony's most famous publishers. You know, Last of Us is getting a TV series. But I'm sure Sony sees the writing on the wall, right? One of our most famous games is getting a movie and a TV series. Uncharted is getting a movie. The jury's still out on that one. It's got Mark Wahlberg.
It's being talked about.
Yeah. Like, I love Tom Holland. I hate Mark Wahlberg. So it's a conflict of interest. Although the actress, I forget her name, who's playing Chloe, looks awesome in it. So I may just go see it for that. Chloe, canonically the best character in Uncharted. Come for me, nerds. Mm-hmm. But like, now with The Last of Us being a TV series, it's not an accident that Sony is pushing these titles to the PC, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be a fervent want, and like the not rumor, it's pretty confirmed. They are remaking the first Last of Us game, which does not need it because I played that on the PS4 not that long ago and it looks great. But they're still doing it. And like that remake, I am pretty confident is going to come day and date on PC because why else remake that game that is not that old and has been remastered already once? And I think that driving of stuff is very, very interesting. Or like how we're getting, Cuphead was exclusive to Xbox initially because they helped that studio publish it and then came to PC. But the Netflix show, Xbox has nothing to do with. Netflix show that's coming out, the animated series, which is astonishing to me that a hand-drawn video game is now getting an animated series after, which is just wild, period.
Everything topsy-turvy.
Right. But Xbox is not involved. I can't remember the name of the studio that published Cuphead, but like, it's just that studio. It's their license and it's coming to Netflix. Like, I'm really curious how these things will bleed and blend in ways that they haven't before. Like you look at Riot, who develops another problematic studio that has its own issues, and how like Valorant and League of Legends are exclusive to PC, but then The Ruined King, which takes place in the League of Legends universe, is multi-platform. Their new TV show Arcane, which is phenomenal, is on Netflix. Like, I think that exclusivity is becoming less and less as these games and franchises become more than just video games. Like a Sonic movie would have never happened, I don't think, in the way it did before Sega switched to making only software. And like, think about the success of Yakuza now, another one that was exclusive to the PS2. The first two games were only on PS2. And I believe the third and fourth game were on only PS3 and so on. Now is on Game Pass, is on Xbox, is on PC, is on Steam, is everywhere, and has become this ubiquitous seller that allowed Like a Dragon to be then cross-platform, be everywhere. It took time to get to certain platforms, but like, that's something Sega could have never done a decade or two ago that now just seems kind of obvious. Sonic Frontier, which is coming out later this year at some point, will launch on, I'm sure, initially PlayStation and Xbox and PC, and then will come to Switch later because I'm sure it won't be able to run on Switch initially or whatever. Like, that just seems more and more common now. And I don't know if I like it or not. At the end of the day, we love people having access to games, right? We're not an advocate for piracy on any level. But if you cannot buy a game anywhere that you want to play, get that game. But like with stuff like this, where I like that Nintendo has exclusives, because also when we've bought Pokemon Arceus, because it'll be out by the time this airs,
right?
We know, while it may run better on a computer or on some other system, we know it's going to be a top tier quality wise game, because Nintendo first party games are always of a quality 99% of the time. It's why Dread is so good. It's why I'm so excited for Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Like, you know that even though it's on hardware that's not as powerful, Nintendo knows how to optimize their games for that. Whereas third party publishers struggle to do that. And that has a pedigree that I don't feel like God of War has. The game is good. I haven't finished it, but I've played a chunk of it, and it's a very good version of that franchise. Like, I didn't like the early God of War games, but I do like what they're doing with that game. But I still don't feel like a God of War, to me, personally, has the pedigree of a Nintendo game. Again, I'm a Nintendo fanboy. Everyone who listens to this podcast knows that. So that can play into it. But I do feel like part of it is the exclusivity. It is the fact that you can only get it in one place. You have no choice. Is interesting to me.
Yeah, you do run into that in these remasters, re-releases, and ports. It seemed more prevalent in older days because of the fact that the architecture was so different. Look up all of the different ports of Pac-Man way back in the day if you want to see some wild frontier times.
Atari Pac-Man is like a fever dream.
It is. I can't believe it's real. And I've never played it, so you know what? I'm not sure if it's real or not. But enough people seem to think it happened. But here we are. But also you run into it with things like, shouldn't Kingdom Hearts be an easier thing to put onto the Switch? Shouldn't the GTA games have been an easier port job? But they really screwed the pooch on that one not too long ago, because of the fact that, if a game is developed for a specific platform or a specific environment, you can optimize it. You can work within even a general open source engine, but make it work for the machinery that you know it's going to run on. There are PC games that are made to work on any machine regardless and still be impressive. And there are ones that are Crysis. Or that are games that are built to be like, we're going to make your system cry. Aren't you into that? Aren't you into how slow everything's going to be because of how fancy it is? Kind of thing. Yeah. And there's a lot of, when porting games and putting them into new environments, sometimes you have to rewrite the code. Sometimes you have to put it in sort of a wrapper where you have like, here's the original code of the game, and what we've written is something that will run that. You're basically writing emulators, which not good, bad, or indifferent. Like, there's no moral anything on that. But it does mean that sometimes you run into the same issue that piracy adjacent emulators do, and that they can't run everything perfectly. And so if you're pulling a emulator off the shelf that, this runs PS3 games so we can put it on the PS5, it doesn't handle all of them super great. Or you run into even rewriting things, unoptimized code. You can look at indie games that go like, how is this a 40 gigabyte game when it's only this long or it's only this much? Whereas there's actual competitions amongst game developers and game jam devotees of making as much of a game in as small of a game as possible. There's a competition that is just 13K games. It is a JavaScript coding competition for making a game in HTML5 that is no larger than 13 kilobytes. Which is deeply impressive and very cool. And I would love to talk to some of the people behind that on this show at some point, because that's a definite viewpoint of game development that I'm very interested in. But this idea of certain things do seem like no-brainers of, that should be able to run on this. The Xbox is more powerful than this thing, so that should be fine. But it's not a guarantee. And I imagine that's also a business quandary that comes up in terms of, is it worth the cost of making this work well enough in our current environment to justify selling it or licensing it or putting it out there? And there's no easy answer to that, but it is a very strange and muddied field that I think is worth looking into more, both you and I, Matt, and everyone else out there.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming to an Ouroboros almost of game franchise exclusives. And the perfect example of it is, so famously Rare, a Nintendo company. They made the Donkey Kong Country games. They made the Banjo-Kazooie games, Donkey Kong 64. GoldenEye was a Nintendo company. And then after some hit or misses, they're acquired by Microsoft. Then all of those games disappear from Nintendo. Like, you could still play like the Donkey Kong games and stuff, but like they then tried to make a Perfect Dark for Xbox, which bombed. They made Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which is his own thing, like struggles. But now Nintendo and Microsoft are starting to play ball again. So those Donkey Kong games came to the Switch Online. But like the pinnacle of this Ouroboros for me is like one of their last Nintendo games, one of their later Nintendo games that is one of the pinnacle Nintendo games. Banjo-Kazooie was just announced that on the 20th, a day after we're recording this, so it'll be out by the time you hear it, is now coming to Switch Online's N64 catalog. It's wild to me that journey that one game went on, because less so with Donkey Kong, because Donkey Kong is owned by Nintendo. That character is a Nintendo character.
Yes.
So I knew those would come. But like for Banjo-Kazooie to go on this ride and then come back around to Switch. And so like, I'm excited for that. I was playing Banjo-Kazooie on my Backbone on my phone because I have the xCloud Gaming, because I have Game Pass. And that was fun and it felt good, but it just, there's something about it. It just didn't feel quite right. But it coming to this N64 platform on the Switch, like it's come back home. Will we get Conker's Bad Fur Day? Will we get, Banjo-Tooie? Like all of that stuff it's really interesting to me that because of how exclusivity works and how these companies are playing ball with each other now, what kinds of things will we see when they start working together? Like, there was a time where I thought like mascot racers and platformers would never have, or fighting games would never have characters from other franchises. Smash Brothers has smashed that, pun intended, most excellently and at the peak with its last character announcement of Sora from Kingdom Hearts, like a character that people have been asking for in Smash Brothers since the first game. But like when we started with Snake and Sonic, which like, all right, well, they're just, those companies aren't Sony exclusives. They've had games on Nintendo platforms. And then we moved on to stuff like Cloud and Sephiroth, characters who until very recently were Sony characters.
Yep.
100%. When Joker was announced, like, that game wasn't and still isn't on Switch.
Yeah, that was the first way anyone had any Persona 5 on a Nintendo console.
And so that kind of partnership, I never imagined. So, Banjo-Kazooie coming to Smash, like I want to say that Sony games will never be on Nintendo systems and Nintendo games will never be on anything but Nintendo systems. But it's so much harder to say that now than it was 10 years ago, because we've trended in a direction that proves that wrong. And like Nintendo has mobile games, a bunch of them that are very successful. I never thought that would be possible. Like Nintendo doesn't make phones. So like if they can do that, there's nothing saying that they can't eventually put those things in other places. So I'm very curious the trend of this, because it's more muddled now than it's ever been before.
Yeah. And I mean, back to the idea of console movers and console sellers, the N64 on Switch Online is an additional cost on top of things. One that has stumbled out of the starting gate, but put Banjo-Kazooie on there, and I think it's going to move some digital units, as it were. It's going to probably get a few extra subscriptions going, and so that Ouroboros continues to roll.
Yeah, I mean, I know for one that the completionist Gerard will probably, if he hasn't already, buy it for that. The biggest Banjo-Kazooie fan I know, but like console exclusivity, let's not get twisted, has always been a business decision.
Absolutely.
From the start, no matter what, has always been a business decision. But like watching these companies start to partner and work together, like remember all those rumors about Game Pass coming to Nintendo Switch? Mm-hmm. That is still a thing I could see happening, especially with the Switch leaning into cloud gaming now. That would be wild if I could play my Xbox games on the Switch via the cloud. It's not that unlike playing them on my phone, which I can currently do right now. It's very interesting to me how that stuff is being smashed, not just by putting new games on new platforms, but like we were talking earlier, or in a previous episode rather, the Castlevania Advance Collection, which is a series of Nintendo Game Boy Advance games, is not just on Switch. It's on other places.
Whereas Castlevania Requiem is still only on the PS4 because of Sony's push to re-release those particular games.
Right.
At the moment.
at the moment. And so it's like, it's criminal to me that Symphony of the Night is not on Switch. It just feels like such a great Switch game. But like that said, it is interesting that even within specific franchises, and another thing I think I should mention before we move on from console exclusivity and wrap this up, a game like Fortnite, which I've recently been playing and is fun, and like I get why people like, has smashed that left and right. Having characters, having Kratos in that game and Master Chief in that game, right? Still no Nintendo characters yet, but Samus has been rumored for a long time to be coming to Fortnite. And so like, I think it's really fascinating to me that even within a specific game, those kinds of exclusivities. And to be clear, you can get Kratos on PC, on PS5, on Xbox. You can get Master Chief on Switch. Like every version of Fortnite has all of these characters. And so that's also wild to me. While Avengers came out and they just finally released Spider-Man for the PS4/5 version of the Avengers game. And that's still a console exclusive, even though that game's multi-platform. What we're still picking and choose to be exclusive is wild to me. And how the different companies negotiate and navigate that is wild to me. Because there used to be a clear A to B line, right? Mm-hmm. This studio is owned by this company, so they're only going to get that game. But that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, Kratos has appeared and guested in other games before. Very notably, he was in Mortal Kombat, but only the PlayStation versions, PS3 and PS Vita.
Yeah, well, it's like Soul Calibur, right? That Soul Calibur 3 had a different guest character for every platform.
Soul Calibur 2.
Oh, it's Soul Calibur 2. That kind of thing might never happen again because it just doesn't seem to operate in that same way anymore, right? Like Geralt was exclusive, I think, to Soul Calibur 6 or 5, whatever the newest one was.
I stopped paying attention after 3, which is why it was such a big thing about it being 2.
Right. But I believe Geralt is in all versions of that game. It's just really interesting to me that exclusives bound by specific rules for so long. This company has a partnership with this game and only they get this game. But now with PC being more prevalent and games like Fortnite just shattering barriers everywhere for exclusivity, the rules are there are no rules anymore.
And certainly they're not what we thought they were anymore. I mean, this isn't even getting into, and we're not going to get into it right now, the idea of further kinds of licensing and copyright. If you have product placement in your game, whether or not that can carry through licensed music, appearances of celebrity resemblances or digitized people, anything like that, this isn't even entering into that conversation. And so there's what we thought were very clearly defined lines based on what we're talking about aren't quite so anymore. And they may just be somewhere that we're not looking. But I think it's going to continue to be a bit of a moving target in the years to come.
I agree. But tell us what you think about console exclusivity. I think it's bunk at this point. I think it's pointless. But again, as a Nintendo fanboy, I am kind of glad that the Switch has those games, because if I could play Metroid Dread on another platform legally, I probably would, because it would look better, it would run better, right? But I like that only for Nintendo, it's sticker, all that stuff. And like, so I'm of two minds about it. Like, I think Sony and Xbox should stop having their dick waving contest and like just be cross-platform. There's my one curse for the last few episodes.
Yep.
But that said, again, I like Nintendo just being Nintendo. So I don't even have a straight answer. So I'm curious what our audience thinks, because I will say this, the console wars are dumb. Play and have whatever console you want. That is dumb. But exclusivity is more complicated than that. And I'm curious what our audience thinks of it.
Yeah. Are there games that you want to stay exclusive that you wish were on other platforms? Are there games that you've collected that were exclusive that are now everywhere and you're a little sour about that? Or games that you're excited that stayed only in one place? Are there games for obscure platforms or environments that you really wish would get some kind of a release? Why aren't the Demon Crush, Alien Crush pinball games on more platforms? I want the collection. Come on. It's so difficult. But let us know. There are so many ways that you can let us know about these favorite games, your thoughts on this topic and all of the other topics we talk about in these shows. You can reach us on Twitter or Gmail at funandgamespod. You can go to certainpov.com and not only check out this show and Side Quests, but also all the other fantastic podcasts on the Certain PV network about all manner of topics. And there's a permanent invite to our Discord server where we continue these conversations there and about comics and TV shows and everything else. And given that, like you said, Matt, a lot of video games are crossing over into those realms, it's nice to have those servers to talk about it.
Yeah. Also, if you would be so kind to rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, especially Apple Podcasts and now Spotify, you can rate it. On Spotify, you don't even have to write one of those pesky reviews. You can just literally select a star. I like to think we're a 5-star podcast, but I'll leave that for you to decide. Please write us. Please reach out to us. At the end of the day, we love having this conversation and we love expanding our reach. And those reviews that you write for us on whatever platform you're on, whatever social media you're on, help us to do that. Thank you to continue for retweeting us and sharing episodes. SideQuest continues to grow because of listeners like you sharing our stuff with your peers. So please continue to do that. Never stop. And thank you for being a part of this world, this audience that we are building together.
So please don't hesitate to review, to reach out, to question, to wonder, we did a Twitter poll not too long ago about the sort of topics you all wanted us to tackle or go about. And even though that poll is over and done with, we still want to hear from all of you because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, all you amazing sentient beings. This is Case Aiken from Certain POV, and outside of podcasting, I work with a group that does Star Trek fan films called Starship Farragut. For 15 years, we've been doing material inspired by the original Star Trek series, but now we're moving on to the movie era with our latest production, Farragut Forward. And that means new sets, new props, and we're gonna have to make those monster maroon uniforms. So we have a crowdfunder running right now. Backers can get access to our soundtracks, have their names show up on screen as part of a duty roster, or even get a walk-on role. Our hope is that this is just the beginning, and that the assets we create with the money we raise will go towards future productions, including possibly a sequel that may just be written by a certain scruffy, nerf-hurting Man of Steel who will take another pass at it. Wink, wink. To back the production, go to Indiegogo and look up Farragut Forward, or find us on Twitter at Farragut1921. And hey, while you're at it, check out the 3-minute prologue we put together to show what we can do. But in the meantime, live long and prosper.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.